Why Sheikh Hamdan stopped posting for 30 days. The real reason: 30 days. For most people, a month of silence on social media means nothing. A break, a holiday, a decision to step back from something that had stopped feeling worth the effort. But Sheikh Hamdan is not most people. His presence on social media is not casual. It is not incidental. It is part of the carefully maintained rhythm of a public figure whose every post, every poem, every photograph is part of a larger story being told to millions of followers in dozens of countries around the world. When that rhythm stops, when the account that has run with the consistency of something managed and intentional suddenly goes quiet for 30 days, it is not nothing. It is a signal. And the people who have been following him long enough to understand the difference between a planned pause and an unplanned one knew immediately that what they were looking at was not a holiday. Something had happened, something real, something serious enough to stop the machine that has been running without significant interruption for years. And today we are going to talk about what it was. The silence began without announcement. That is the first detail that matters. A planned break, the kind that public figures sometimes take when they need to step back from social media in a managed way, usually comes with some kind of signal. A final post that reads like a temporary goodbye, a story or a note that prepares the audience for the absence, something that tells the people watching that this is intentional and temporary and that the return is already scheduled. None of that happened. The posting simply stopped mid rhythm without the usual note, without any of the signals that would have told his followers this was something he had decided in advance. It stopped the way things stop when something interrupts them from the outside. Not a choice to pause, but a circumstance that made continuing impossible. The official silence from the palace during those 30 days was complete. No statement, no explanation, no carefully worded non answer from the team that manages his public communications. Just the absence itself, sitting in the place where the posts used to be, growing heavier with every day that passed without a return. His followers noticed within the first week. The comments on his last post began to fill with questions, with concern, with the specific anxiety that people feel when someone they have been watching closely suddenly disappears from the space where they had always been visible. And the questions went unanswered because there was nobody on the other side of them who was authorized to say what was actually happening. What was actually happening was this: the 30 days of silence corresponded exactly with one of the most difficult periods of his private life, the dismantling of the chapter he had been living. The woman he had chosen, the children they shared, the private promise he had made that this time things would be different, was happening in real time during those 30 days. Not gradually, not over the course of months that allowed for adjustment and processing. Quickly, with the efficiency that royal family decisions always bring when they have been made at the level where Sheikh Mohammed operates. The woman was being asked to leave. The children were being prepared for the transition. The life that Hamdan had privately committed himself to was being taken apart piece by piece, while the world outside the palace saw nothing but a 30-day gap in a social media account. He could not post. That is the honest answer to why the silence happened. Not because anyone told him he was not allowed to, but because the version of himself that appears in those posts, composed, poetic, moving through the world with the grace and the controlled beauty that his public image requires, was not available during those 30 days. The person who was living through that month was not the person who writes poems about the desert light and posts photographs of horses against open skies. He was someone in the middle of a loss that was active and ongoing, and not yet resolved into something he could hold at the distance necessary for public presentation. And Hamdan has always understood, instinctively and precisely, the difference between what belongs in the public space and what belongs in the private one. Those 30 days belonged entirely to the private one. The people inside the palace during that period describe a man who was present in the most minimal sense of the word, fulfilling the absolute requirements of his official role, the things that could not be delegated or postponed, and nothing beyond that. Not the additional appearances, not the extra events, not the kind of voluntary public presence that he maintains when his private life is stable enough to allow him the energy for it. Just the minimum. The floor, not the ceiling. A man doing what duty demanded while carrying something that took everything else he had. His poetry during those 30 days was not posted publicly, but people close to him have said that he was writing. More than usual, actually. Writing the way people write, when the only place the feeling can go is onto a page. Not for an audience, not for the account, not for the millions of people who follow his work and feel something when they read it. Just for himself. Just to have somewhere to put what was happening. The poems from that period have never been released. They are probably the most honest writing he has ever done. And they are probably the writing that will never be seen by the people who would understand it most. Because what they document is too private and too painful and too specific to the chapter of his life that the official story has decided not to acknowledge. When he came back, when the account resumed and the first post appeared after 30 days of silence, the response from his followers was enormous. Relief, welcome, the specific warmth that communities feel when someone they have been worried about reappears and seems, on the surface at least, to be okay. The post itself was characteristically beautiful, a poem, an image, something that carried the quality of his best public work, layered, emotionally resonant, accessible on the surface, and deeper underneath for anyone paying close enough attention. But the people who had been following him long enough to read the difference felt it immediately. Something in the writing had shifted. The poems after the 30 days carried a quality that the poems before it had not carried in quite the same way. A tiredness underneath the beauty, a flatness underneath the emotion. The quality of writing that comes from a person who has come through something significant and is continuing. Because continuing is what they know how to do. Because the role requires it. Because there is no alternative available to them, but is continuing from a different place than the one they left from. He was back. But the person who came back was not entirely the same as the one who had gone quiet 30 days before. That is the real reason Sheikh Hamdan stopped posting for 30 days. Not a holiday, not a planned break, not a strategic pause in the management of his public image. A month in which the private version of his life demanded everything he had and left nothing available for the public version. A month of loss lived quietly behind palace walls, while the world outside waited and wondered and filled the comment section with questions that nobody was authorized to answer. He came back. He always comes back. But the silence told a story that the return could not fully erase. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell. Every week I bring you the real story behind Sheikh Hamdan's public life. The silences that were never explained. The 30 days that changed something permanently. And the truth that lives in the space between the posts.